Call the April 22nd, 2021 Area Planning Commission meeting to order. Rise for the pledge. Gary, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Darren Price.
Here.
Leota King.
Present.
Ryan Durham.
Here.
Dale Munson.
Here.
Gary Naylor.
Here.
Robert Stewart.
Here.
Brian Robb.
Here.
Bill Mackey.
Here.
Ryan Hensley. He's absent. Bill McDaniel.
Present.
Jeff Westling.
Present.
And myself.
Meeting minutes, we don't have meeting minutes from the 25th of both months, of February or March, but we'll have those for the next meeting. So item 4 on the agenda, we have Deb Luzier here for some APC and BZA board member training. So the floor is yours, ma'am.
Very good. So as you mentioned, my name is Deborah Luzier, and I do training sessions for various planning commissions and BZAs throughout the state. And so what I'm discussing with you today is called Knowing Your ABCs of the APCs and the BZAs. So if you want to flip to the next one there. I am actually a certified planner. That's what the AICP stands for, American Institute of Certified Planners. Other people say it stands for Any Idiot Can Plan, but it just kind of depends on, what your perspective is. I work for GRW Engineering, and they specialize in wastewater, sewers, and for whatever reason, they hired me as a planner to serve some of their clients. I'm the only planner in the whole company of about 350 employees, so I sometimes feel like that exotic animal at the zoo where they know they gotta have one, they're not sure why, but they keep me there. What I do in my career right now is I write zoning and subdivision ordinances. I also write amendments when needed. I serve as Plan Commission staff for various communities and their building department staff. It's a little crazy because sometimes I have to administer the ordinances that I write, so that can be a challenge, keeps me on my toes. I also do comprehensive plans and then jump in and do on-call services. For example, if somebody has a planner that's on maternity leave or an extended vacation, I can jump in and keep things running without interrupting service to their residents and their boards and such. Some planning experience in the area here. I've worked for Clark County, which is down south, Jasper County, near Rensselaer, Randolph County nearby here, as well as Dearborn County. So I've written ordinances or worked on comprehensive plans for all of those communities, and I also do cities and towns as well. So next. So I'm sure some of this is going to be old hat for some of you. As I understand, you're pretty seasoned. Others of you may be a little new, but we're just going to cover the whole gambit, and so hopefully if it's not something you know, it may be a little refresher for you and just kind of a reminder of how things work. The Indiana state statute oversees planning and zoning for everybody in the state of Indiana. So they discussed your plan commissions and your BZAs and all of their roles and responsibilities. And this is going to include the establishment, how you guys are established, the membership of your groups, how your organized and workings occur. And they also outline the duties, which are the things you have to do, and then the powers, the things that you may do. So you have some options and flexibility there. So as far as the establishment, the Area Plan Commission is established under the 200 series of the Indiana State Statute. You exercise planning and zoning powers and issue permits for the community or the jurisdiction you oversee. So as I understand it, you guys handle the Fayette County as well as Connorsville for everything they do. And your purpose for existing basically is for the planning of the highways, transportation ways, the quality of life for your residents, the needs of the agricultural communities, industries and businesses, as well as the efficient use of public funds. And I just noticed a typo there. Your Board of Zoning Appeals is established under the 900 series of the statute. You also have jurisdiction over all the land covered by the zoning ordinance. And your purposes for existing are to consider variances from the standards of the zoning ordinance. You consider special exception uses, which are uses that may be appropriate in a zoning district but need a little extra examination, as well as appeals of the staff, any decisions that your staff makes. Your membership, your membership of your area plan commission and your BZA is covered under various statutes as well. So since you're an area plan commission and you oversee different jurisdictions with your one group, your membership is covered under several different statutes there, 207 to 211. And the different statutes there basically say if you have participating towns that are this size, you have this many members, and you have appointments by various entities such as the county commissioners, the county council, participating town councils, the school corporation, and then others depending on what statute that you follow. The statute also allows an area plan commission to create its own membership guidelines. So if, for example, you have an extra community participating or you have specialty interest groups that you need to have representation, you can create your own membership statute for yourselves. The BZA, however, very specific. You get a 5-member board. It's covered under Section 902D, and you have appointments by the county commissioners, the plan commission from its membership, and your participating town councils. Now, the organization of your plan commission and BZA, these are things that are also covered in your, or should be covered in your rules and procedures. So the 300 series covers the plan commission, and it talks about what constitutes a quorum. That means a majority of your full membership, not just those that show up. You have to have, I'm assuming you have a 9-member plan commission, so you gotta have at least 5 people in agreement on a motion, not just if only 5 people show up, 3. No, you gotta have that full 5. It also talks about what constitutes official action. If a motion is made and you don't get those 5 folks voting one way or the other, you haven't taken official action, and you need to either come up with another motion or continue it till you have enough information to make a strong vote of your quorum. It also talks about the leadership. You have a chairman and a vice chairman, or a president and a vice president, depending on how your rules go. You'll have a secretary or somebody that takes minutes and oversees that information. And you have to keep track of your meetings and minutes, setting your calendar, either recording verbatim or typed minutes of some sort. And they also oversee the employees of your planning department. The Board of Zoning Appeals, pretty much the same thing. It talks about the quorum, which is going to be at least 3 of your 5 members, what constitutes official action, the leadership of that board, and you'll also have a secretary and need to oversee your meetings and minutes as well. So notice that the BZA does not oversee employees. That's the job of the Plan Commission. The Board of Zoning Appeals is kind of a sister organization to the Plan Commission, but they don't oversee things. The Plan Commission oversees it and makes most of the decisions there. So the duties of each of the groups, this is the must-dos, the things that you have to do. And these are laid out in the 400 series. So you have to adopt rules and procedures. And I'm assuming, since I've known Bill forever, and I know he's a wonderful planner, he's made sure you have rules and procedures that you all follow. You're going to want to address things in your rules such as, what order do the meetings happen? When are your meetings going to occur? What constitutes maybe a conflict of interest? When you should recuse yourself from a meeting? Maybe also go over your membership again and kind of make sure everybody's following those guidelines. The Plan Commission also has to approve the comprehensive plan. So once you have a new plan or amendments to your comprehensive plan, your Plan Commission would approve or deny that. and then send that on to the legislative bodies to ratify through a resolution. And just as a reminder, your comprehensive plan is a guide, it's not a law, so it's to help you make the decisions, but it's nothing that you can enforce specifically. That's the role of your ordinances to do that. So the Plan Commission also considers development plans, and these are going to be for like, if you have a new business coming to town, you want to look at how that site's laid out, where access is, make sure it's meeting all the setbacks and bulk regulations in your ordinances. A lot of communities delegate this to staff, so it doesn't have to go to the Plan Commission. You can have your staff oversee this for you. Another thing is to consider primary plats for subdivisions. These have to go to your Plan Commission, and it is through a public hearing, so the public is involved in any lot splits for subdivisions as defined in your ordinances. And the Plan Commission makes the final decision on these subdivisions. The Plan Commission also makes recommendations on any changes to your zoning map. So a petition would come to you to change from one zoning district to another. Your Plan Commission merely makes a recommendation, and they can attach conditions for that recommendation, and then it goes on to the legislative body who makes the final decision. And then, of course, your zoning and subdivision ordinance recommendations. If you're making any amendments to your ordinances, again, just like a zone map change, you would make a recommendation that then goes to the legislative body who makes that final decision. Not sure if do you guys use planned unit developments or PUDs in your ordinances?
Oh, we have that option to use it. There's maybe 2 or 3 locations where there's PUDs.
Okay, so.
Don't like them personally.
The planned unit development is more like a zoning ordinance that applies to a specific area of land, and that's what governs it instead of your overall zoning and subdivision ordinances. And they give a lot of flexibility to a developer if he has a unique product that can't be fit on property under the normal ordinances. Pros and cons to it, they can be pretty detailed. If your staff changes over time, they may not have that base knowledge of why things came to be the way they are, and you kind of lose some of that detail. But if you keep good records, it's a great tool for flexibility for development in your community.
Ma'am, if you
yes.
don't mind, could you maybe give an example of that? What we would use that for, PUD?
PUD, in the
In
event,
particular,
sure, if you have a property that wants to maybe have some single-family homes, maybe some multi-family dense development in it, maybe a little commercial component mixed in, almost creating its own little self-sustaining community. That's how you would do it without having multiple different zoning districts within. It would just be one zoning district, and then it comes with a document that says, here's how each of these areas function, here's the permitted uses, here's setbacks, anything else that they
It
would
would
want to do.
prevent someone building a 10-foot fence around their property. I mean, if you take away from the subdivision to make everything look, I mean, that's probably what you do when you have a subdivision
could.
like that. Yeah.
You could, or they could
putting up
say-
a 40 by 60 barn in a subdivision.
Right, they
Yeah.
could,
Yeah.
if they wanted something like that in there, they could say, hey, we want to have livestock on these 5-acre lots
Yeah.
in the back, but we want to have apartments up front or something. It's just they're writing their own rules for that
Something
property.
keep from disrupting the neighborhood.
Right,
Could-
right.
is that something that could be used in maybe ag zoning?
Could. It would
Where-
change the zoning entirely. It would just be called PUD, and then you would refer to a document that governs it.
Rather than having,
Your usual ordinances apply.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But
They write
having
their own
said that,
rules.
there's not a limit to the number of dwellings involved in order to have a PUD.
Nope. It's
You can do a
whatever.
one-house PUD.
Well, that wouldn't be a good use of
I wouldn't
that
think
tool.
so. I don't want anybody doing anything.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
okay, all right, thank
But
you.
yeah, so they write their own rules and their
Yeah.
own governing documents instead of using your usual zoning.
But it's a
and
platted
subdivision.
subdivision normally this is used for.
Yeah. A lot of communities use them for mixed uses because they require a commercial component or something. Some of them even go so far as to say, here's how the streets are gonna be built. This is gonna be a boulevard through here, secondary streets, it will be on a grid, or all the homes have to look like this, and somebody has to approve all of them.
Where do we have that here? Did you say there wasn't?
Well, we have a PUD district, for example, are the apartments on the, well, this one was actually drawn, I think, before I was here, but it has where Clark's is at, and then also the apartments next door, those are Clark's. Those are the PUDs.
Because I just wanted to, because it's not a, it's a little different than like restricted covenant, but it's the same sort of concept.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. But it's a covenant that your staff can administer, it's not just amongst the property owners. It gives you guys the ability to administer it as well.
Or police it.
Right,
Yeah, I'd say is
exactly.
the limitation just by us, or how many of these you would have?
No, there's no limit.
No limit.
For example, up in Fishers, Indiana, everybody's heard of them. Every residential subdivision that comes in is a PUD. And what got pretty crazy is they had about 50 of them. And then when the staff was called to administer something in them, you had to look up every PUD and try to figure out what's going on. I was involved in an effort to take all of those PUD documents and organize each one of them in the same format so they could quickly look up stuff and find out what they needed to find. So it can be cumbersome if it's overused, to say the least. And the Plan Commission, another duty is to assign street names and addresses. A lot of times that's also delegated to staff, and then when they're reviewing a plat or something, they're doing the behind-the-scene check on street names, making sure there's no conflict, working with the 911 services, and getting that all set up. So the duties of the Board of Zoning Appeals is covered under the 900 series. They also adopt rules and procedures. They consider special exceptions, variances from your standards, and appeals from any staff decisions. So if you're not familiar with them, special exceptions means that a use is called out in a specific zoning district that says this use needs BZA approval. And the reason you do that is because, a few reasons. First, the BZA can assign some conditions. You look at each use by itself, each case-by-case scenario. You can apply conditions such as maybe you're limited to one entrance and it has to occur here. Or because of where you're proposing it, we want to make sure you have some extra setbacks from some concerned neighbors. It also gives the opportunity to bring the use up at a public forum so the public can participate in that decision-making for that use. Trying to think what else it's really good for. Just basically takes the burden off of just staff to assign the use, and involves that public process and the Board of Zoning Appeals in deciding whether that use is appropriate for where it's being proposed. The variances from the standards, you probably see a lot of sign variances. Somebody wants a bigger sign than permitted. Maybe they want to reduce setbacks because they have a large tree they're trying to avoid. Those are the most common variances you might see. And then appeals from staff decisions. If somebody disagrees with a decision Bill had made, which I'm sure never happens.
Not for a while.
Not for a while, well, that's good.
We haven't been real busy with much of anything.
Sure. But if something should come up, and they don't agree with Bill's decision, they can bring it to the Board of Zoning Appeals, who can make that final decision. Bill would present his side of the story, the applicant would talk about theirs, and then the BZA can make that final decision for you.
And then the next step from that would be court, right?
Right.
We should know that
I
process.
was gonna say,
Yeah.
I'm pretty familiar with that one.
What's come up with the courts from a BZA decision? Or what's your hot button? Everybody's smirking.
Well, we just finished some litigation.
Gotcha. Okay, all right.
It was a nightmare.
They always are, unfortunately. So there are also powers outlined in the statutes, and these are the may-dos, the things you don't have to do, but you can if you need to. For the Plan Commission, it's covered under the 400 series, and it allows the Plan Commission to establish an executive committee from the membership to act on its behalf. So if, for example, you get really, really busy and you need some help with maybe approving minor plats or something, you know, kind of no-brainers that you're pretty sure are going to be easy to decide, you can have that executive committee review those and make decisions. If, for example, you have a PUD that comes through, you may want this executive committee to do an in-depth review of it and report back to the Plan Commission. So you have an official review of some of the members involved on that. So it's a handy tool if you get into a situation where you're really busy or need just extra examination of something. The Plan Commission also drafts and recommends a fee schedule for your Plan Commission and BZA petitions, any permits, and any fees associated with the operations of the office. So if you're looking at your annual budget, that's prepared by the Plan Commission, who makes a decision on that and forwards that to the legislative body. Sometimes it goes straight to the legislative body and you're not involved, but you do have the option of bringing that to the Planning Commission for their decision.
Oh, Deb? Well, because we've been through this bout, because right now, the fee schedules are in the, well, number one, we have the one we need to get out of the building code.
Okay.
We also need to really, is ideally, I think, get it out of the zoning code.
Right, yes.
But what options, some of the pros and cons, the alternatives, say, such as either rules or in the rules of procedure, or with the, or as I say, a county fee schedule, part of the county fee schedule. I mean, what are some of the pros and cons of those?
I'm an advocate of not having your fees in your zoning and subdivision ordinances. That way you can look at them by themselves and propose changes without having to go through the formal process of updating the entire ordinance, reprinting it, reformatting it, things like that. It also can be a can of worms if somebody sees in the public advertising you're amending your zoning ordinance and they all think worst case scenario, when really you're just updating the fees for inflation or creating a new fee for something. Usually that fee should be adopted by the legislative body as a separate ordinance. That way if anybody has an issue with it, Bill can confidently say, hey, that's what the county commissioners or that's what the town council has adopted and that's what we follow.
Yeah, because I remember once a few years ago, I think it was started in relation to one of my questions about it. And I know a lot of people chimed in because there's a lot of, okay, yeah, we're looking at, we want to renew ours, we want to do this, but someone put in a suggestion as that one option is. Now, I think for me politically, I think as a political decision, the legislative body makes the most sense. Although I guess there's probably not many, but there's a potential to put it, say, adopt them in your rules. But I don't really like that idea because it's removing it outside of the political process.
Exactly. And there's some fees that you establish not to necessarily cover the costs of performing the services, but it's a fee that you need in place to help you track something. For example, a lot of my communities issue a permit for fences, and they have a very minor fee for that fence permit. Their main goal is to make sure those fences aren't being put in any drainage or utility easements and causing a problem. They're not really going to say yes or no to the fence itself. They just want to review that location and make sure it's being put somewhere properly and not getting in the way of things. However, other fees, you know, a lot of times it's user driven and you want to make sure that your staff's time that's involved in something is being reimbursed in some way. Right. When I go to work for a community as a consultant and act as their planner, obviously my rate's probably a little different than what an employee's rate might be. So a lot of times I'll go in and calculate, okay, I know it's going to take me 3 hours to deal with a BZA petition, 1 to process the file, another hour to write your staff report, and another hour to attend that meeting. So I calculate my hourly rate and say this is what your fee should be for any variance petition that comes before the BZA. And then the legislative body can decide, do they want to cover that 100%, or do they feel, hey, this is a service we provide our constituents, we want to foot part of the bill ourselves and subsidize that and knock it down to 50% or something like that. When I was a full-time planner working for communities, I would make sure that all of our operating costs were covered by all of our permits and fees, and then the salaries and hourly rates for our other employees were done just out of the general fund through the ordinance. So I would have my staff, anytime they pick up a file, write down how much time they spent on it. And the end of the year, we kind of go through all those files and see, oh, well, we're averaging about 4 hours on a plan commission file, maybe an hour on a building permit file, and try to adjust our fees accordingly.
So you said the legislative body approves that, both, in our case, both the city council and the commissioners?
Right. I don't know
And
if you have a separate
could they
fee for-
request separate fee schedules?
In theory, they could, but I don't think Bill wants to do it that way.
No. Well, one thing that we have, of course, it's an area plan commission
Right.
with the planning side. But we also have on top of that, though, since the way the ordinances that adopted the building code is that the building, okay, basically the county commissioners are essentially the building commission. And then the city of Connersville, basically, they agree that the city and the Fayette County is handling all the
Yes.
building permits. So at least that part then, because it's actually the county is doing the actual building inspections. So that part should really be, I would assume, makes sense. It's actually the county department that's doing it for the city. That would be then with the county ordinance. Yeah.
But I've seen it done in different ways. Sometimes it gets real specific. The town will say, we want our fees to be this for permits or something like that. And the county says, no, we want it to be this for our permits. So anytime you can unite things and make them all the same, it works a lot better, as I'm sure you
Amen.
can tell. And then also another interesting thing is the Board of Zoning Appeals can have a hearing officer, which kind of acts as, again, a staff position that can make decisions on easy petitions. Maybe it's a little setback variance of 10% or less or something like that. But it's the Plan Commission that would appoint that hearing officer, not the BZA. So that's kind of a little odd thing. And as far as the BZA goes, they don't have any may-dos. They're specifically, here's your duties, this is what you do, this is all you do. You don't have the flexibility of that.
Okay, well, I've got a question then about the hearing officer. So that should be someone other than the director that is appointed, right?
Could be, yes.
Okay, but it could appoint the director as another duty.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Are you raising your hand and volunteering for this, Bill, or?
Well, there's some cases it would probably be beneficial,
Right.
yeah.
But you would still go through the public hearing process, do your notices, still have findings of fact. So
Okay.
you're
So
not
still-
bypassing
So you're
that.
not bypassing, so for me, there really isn't an advantage to doing it.
Unless, like I said, you're getting a lot of minor variances and the BZA is like, we're so sick of hearing about these, Bill, you just take it and deal with it, so.
I do that anyway.
You mean, what you're saying there, we could create a set of variances, that the BZA could create a set of, a certain level of variances that they could automatically say, Bill, as director, you can make these decisions. They don't have to come before the board? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. We want, Bill, we want you to act on our behalf and handle these minor cases.
And then
Or
then
a member of the board,
Right,
as that,
yes.
okay, as that person?
All right.
Huh, okay. So who creates that list of variances that can be handled by that hearing officer?
Yeah,
The BZA?
The area plan
The
committee.
APC?
Yeah.
Okay.
The BZA has no say in that whatsoever. The APC actually gets to pick who it would be.
The officer, plus, and the variances?
And they dictate what variances would come into
Well,
play.
well, for example,
Could you include special exceptions too?
Yes,
So you could, so the APC could essentially dictate who hears certain special exceptions and certain variances. I don't think we have enough on our agendas for this to be something.
No, and even in that, you can have something that's There's two of them not exactly alike, but fall into the same category. You may want to look at them a little bit closer than just saying, go ahead and make a decision on
Well,
it.
I guess what my concern, Jeff, was on that example would be just in my tenure, I've seen a couple of three continuances in variance applications because we didn't have a quorum where,
It slows down something, maybe it's very important to somebody to get their project moving.
yeah, and we delayed contractors before because of the BZA can't act on it. Well, if we could create a set of standards of variances that would only have to come to that hearing officer, whoever that might be, we might be able to speed those construction projects up a little bit and not delay these contractors some.
Well, only if you had a lack of quorum to roll out in the first place.
Well,
I will say, if I may, Gary, I think the real reason that you sometimes lack a quorum, to me, the hearing officer role is to alleviate an overflow of work. What we have is a lack of flow, and that's why people don't,
well, and,
does that, you understand what I mean?
yeah, I understand what
I would say.
I mean, I understand what's causing the
1 in
lack
5
of quorum
meetings has
sometimes.
something of
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 value.
importance.
Yeah.
And so it is sometimes hard to be motivated to attend every meeting when only 1 in 5 is of importance.
Yeah.
And I fear that if you assign a hearing officer, it's hard to find people who want to be, not everybody is a dork like me, and actually enjoys it.
Now, you said that.
I'm a total nerd about it, I
Oh
get
my
it.
gosh.
But not everybody wants that, and so I think it would worry me to take more duties away because essentially, it's hard enough to find folks to come, and that's the only thing that works. Sure, there's lots of times I would love to just have Bill decide. However, I don't think that that's the best.
Right. And
Yeah, there's times
I
when
didn't
I don't wanna
necessarily
go,
mean
yeah.
Bill.
It's a good option. I didn't think you were wanting to do it today.
No,
I
I-
think that that's-
No.
I was just trying to look at ways that we can speed things up for contractors.
Oh, I have enough people who probably want to shoot me for enough things.
If I did for anything, it'd be the daggone signs, like the sign ordinance, I feel like that's what we hear the most. Like,
Yeah.
as a BZA member, I'm like, yes, you can have a 2 feet by 2 inch sign instead of 2 feet, I don't care about those 2 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one also is things like, we get things over fences.
Yes, okay.
Fences, a good example is, we have in the R1, R2, and R3, it's a 5-foot yard. Now, in the zoning code is then, but you can, it'll allow a variance, but it states that no more than, say, 3 feet into it. So that might be an occasion right there, if someone, say, wants to go 2 or 3 feet into something, that could be appropriate.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be something to try to avoid having someone else make the tough decisions. It'd be
Yes. it's-
little
like-
small things.
Like the one I had forever ago with the lady who, because of the way that their houses were and the platform porch or whatever,
Yeah.
every time the people walked out of their house, her dog would bark and it annoyed everyone. And so she wanted a fence tall enough that when the people walked out of their house, their dog couldn't see them. That sounds like a brilliant idea to me. Those are the kind of things that, yes,
Yeah.
I think
Rather than shooting a dog. Just an idea.
Bad. Good job.
So since we talked a little bit about that hearing officer possibly being a staff, let's talk a little bit about what the role of your staff is. And this varies from community to community. It's also based on what kind of experience has your staff had? Are they just more administrative for you, or do you want them to play a more active role? That's a function of, what kind of petitions you have coming through, what kind of developments you have, how busy you are. There's a whole lot of things that come into play. But in my view, the administrative role of staff is obviously to keep track of files, keep them organized and available for public viewing and accessibility. Keeping track of your ordinances and maps, and again, making sure those are available to the public, staff, various boards when needed. Making sure your meetings, your files, all of your office activities are available for public accessibility where appropriate. Keeping track of your meeting minutes and the decisions that your board and commission makes. So those are going to be the administrative things that the must-dos, if you will.
Oh, I have a question related to the ordinances, well, particularly the maps. Now that we have someone who hosts our GIS, is some sort of language instead of the big paper map kept by the zoning administrator in this particular office, language then would designate, say, the map that's hosted by the GIS service as the official zoning map?
It could, yes.
Yeah, because I would like that.
Sure. Well, but then you're also gonna have a little bit of transition time. If you make the council or commissioners approves a rezoning, but it doesn't get to the mapping department for a week or get into their system for a week, Bill would still be responsible for if somebody calls in to say, this is the current snapshot of the ordinances and the maps regardless of what your online post says. Also, what you see online is going to be a snapshot in time. It's not you can't print it off and say, this is the way it is forever. That's just, again, a snapshot on that date, so.
And also make them clear with the caveats that, okay, but still, you want to get the interpretation because there may be some issues with there.
Right.
You still need to get the interpretation.
Are you saying my 1986 zoning map is out of date?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Maybe not in some
Truth,
areas.
truth to be known.
Well, no, it was superseded by the one from 1993.
I was say 93, right?
1836. I got one.
So on top of all the administrative responsibilities, your staff can play an advisory role. So they can provide expertise about your ordinances. They can provide staff reports with recommendations based on not only their expertise, but their knowledge of, how findings of fact are created, whether you're meeting findings of fact or things like that based on the petition in front of them. I feel it's staff's responsibility to keep in touch with what's going on at the legislature every year, what kind of changes are occurring in state law that may affect you. Luckily, Bill's part of the Indiana chapter of the American Planning Association, as am I. I actually serve as the legislative committee co-chairperson, so I'm the one that's keeping track of all the bills. I'm calling my friends going, hey Bill, you're an expert on this, or you have experience with this. How does this law affect your community? What should we look at? I've testified at the committee hearings and provided input on some of them. It used to be just a couple of us that tracked everything, but this year I said I'm not doing it all anymore. I need help, and so we put together a team of about 20 people with various expertises to keep track of different bills and provide input and report back. So I no longer know everything that's going on, but I can make a couple calls and find that out in a minute. So. It's also staff's responsibility to kind of keep track of case law that may affect your ordinances. A big one that affected us recently is going to be the change in sign code interpretation, where signs cannot be regulated by the content anymore. So if you have to read it to regulate it, you're doing it wrong. So all you can say is you can only have so many signs, they can only be so big, and you can only put them here and there. Beyond that, you really can't regulate signs by what they say. So,
That was a bear trying to deal with the Gilbert Road.
yes.
Yeah, it's rough, yeah.
Yeah, so, it's been hard. I've been working on ordinance for about 3 years to try and perfect how can you regulate signs now. Again, we pretty much just say permanent signs or temporary signs. These are the types you can have and where you can put them and how big they can be. And as soon as you say, well, you can have a for sale sign in your yard, oh, no, you can't say the for sale sign. It has to be like a temporary sign. Or you can't say a billboard anymore. You can only say, signs.
Off-premise.
Okay.
Yeah, off-premise sign. Well, even calling it off-premises is considered regulated content in some contexts.
Well, what we did with with what we now have as the sign regulations is we didn't even call them off-premise sign. We just referred to them as just a freestanding sign.
Yep.
So it still had to abide by all the same setbacks, distances, sizes, any other Any other freestanding signs, if you have a 75 square foot limit, well, that's a 75 square
Yeah.
foot
You
limit on
want
any
that
sign.
billboard, ask for a variance for a size.
Yeah, or you gotta be happy with a 75 square foot sign. Yeah.
Another thing to keep in touch with, staff should know about best practices. If there's a new way to regulate something or an easier way to regulate something, that's something they should be keeping track of and share with people. So, thanks. So I also include a little bit about what each group can't do. So the Area Plan Commission cannot deny a subdivision or development plan if it meets the standards of the ordinance. There might be some elements of that development plan or subdivision you can tweak, but you can't just say, we don't like it, we're denying it. If it meets your ordinances set out and adopted by your legislative body, you essentially have to approve it. Planning Commission cannot decide whether or not a particular use or service is needed. In the Indianapolis area, you got some communities saying, we have enough single-family homes, we don't need any more subdivisions. Can't do that. Everybody's entitled to their subdivision, provided it meets the standards of your ordinance. Commission cannot decide price points for homes or businesses. You can't say all the homes you bring into this development have to be at least $150,000. That's really a function of the market and not something that the Planning Commission should be regulating.
So how does that then fit in with when someone's adopting a, say, affordable housing provision where there's, some of them, it's, we have affordable housing, which has to be,
You can set square footage adjustments.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you know, everything 1,500 square foot or better, which is gonna put the price,
Something concrete, which may lead to a price
Yeah.
window, but you can't.
you can't set a price.
Set that price, right. You can't decide things about drainage if it's regulated by your drainage board or another group. All you can do is ask that group, does it meet your drainage ordinance? Yes, then that becomes part of your review.
Okay, hang on. So
Last
with
month.
drainage, let's,
had a discussion about that last month.
drainage and stormwater are two separate things.
Yes.
And so one of the concepts we talked about was there are several ways to work on stormwater, whatever, governance. How's
Right.
that? That's the best way I can, and whether or not we even want to do it, should do it, whatever. I mean, I feel like eventually there will be a state provision, I believe, on that. I think
I
that's
would
gonna be
agree with
sooner
that.
rather than later. However, one of the things I found actually kind of surprised me is how many counties have their stormwater drainage as a zoning ordinance.
As part of their zoning ordinance?
Yes.
That's a possibility.
So, and it's separate. A lot of times, like the one I'm thinking of, they have a stormwater ordinance in their zoning code. It is administered, even though you go to bill, the application, the information is all reviewed by the surveyor and the drainage board.
Right. Right.
So even though you obtain a stamp from the area plan, it's actually reviewed.
Review, exactly. There's other groups involved in the regulation of that. I think is
So
what
is
we're
that,
getting
like,
at.
I want to make sure I didn't,
Nope,
does that
you're
make
right.
sense to everybody from what we
Yeah.
talked about last
Yeah,
week?
because, well, we have something along those lines, similar to those with when we have the subdivisions. Because what has been involved with the review for subdivisions have been the soil water conservation district with the drainage plans.
Yeah, the Rule 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Rule 5, yeah.
So you're asking them if it complies with their
Yeah, exactly.
regulations.
Because some of the last ones we had from Mason McGraw, it's I went up there, then with Mason, and then I went up there with Mason to then have the SWCD when they had staff, and then of course there's someone also, the NRCS was there also to review it.
So if those groups say it drains, the Plan Commission can't say, no, it doesn't, we deny it. So they're the ones that oversee that. Another thing that's usually a little bit unclear is the Plan Commission cannot grant a variance to a standard in the zoning ordinance. They can only grant what's called waivers to the subdivision standards. So if somebody wants to deviate from the standards in your zoning ordinance, again, whether it's a setback, a parking requirement, something like that, your Plan Commission can't hear that. That has to go to the BZA to make that decision. The Plan Commission cannot apply unrelated conditions to its approval. So you can't say, we're gonna approve this subdivision, but all the homes have to be purple. There's no correlation between the purple color and the subdivision to necessitate that kind of condition. The Plan Commission cannot initiate a subdivision. They can only take action on a petition with, or they can't take action on a petition without a full majority of its full membership. So again, we just talked about that a little while later. If you got 9 people, you have to have at least 5 voting along with the motion to make it happen. So next are the things the BZA cannot do. BZA cannot approve a petition before them that does not meet all of the criteria. So when you have findings that you need to meet for each type of petition, some of those findings, as you're aware, are set out in state statute. Some are decided at a local level. But you have to go through each finding and ask yourself, each of the members ask themselves, does this petition meet each and every one of these criteria? I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with each of those criteria, and you can discuss that during the meeting. Once the public hearing is closed, you can call out each type of finding. Hey guys, what do you think of this? Does it meet this finding? Why or why not? Ask your staff, Bill, does this meet the finding or does it not? So, and the BZA considers those petitions on a case-by-case basis. Just because you found that, Steve's petition met all the findings doesn't mean Bob has an identical petition before you. You act on each one independently, and there's no precedence in your decisions.
Yeah, because that's one of the things in the past is we've had members of the zoning board have been, they're afraid of, we created a precedence. It's like, no, they're trying to explain everything's a unique situation.
Yep.
So you're not, by just doing this, in this case, it isn't. So I would think that's part of the particular importance of the board members during their discussion of how and why it does or does not meet those particular criteria. So it helps make it, emphasize the unique situation.
Right. And again, that's by going through each of those criteria and making a decision if it's met or not. That's what keeps you out of court, or causes problems and leaves you legally vulnerable. So that's another thing to think about when you're making your decisions. Are we doing this correctly and thoroughly? The BZA cannot decide whether a particular use or service is needed, same as the Planning Commission. So if you have a special exception come in for, let's say a home occupation or something, you can't say, well, there's enough neighbors in that area that have home occupations. We don't need any more of those. You can't do that. You have to, again, look at each one individually.
Well, I've had comments from members of the public because we probably have more home occupations as hairdressers.
Yeah.
And I've had people say, well, we've got more than enough hairdressers. It's like, so,
Yeah.
that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's kind of like filling stations. You hear,
Yeah.
well, we got all kinds of filling stations. Well, but if there's still a market,
Yeah, they wouldn't be looking at.
the investors will still invest.
Yeah,
Well, gun stores, you got one on every corner.
But there must be a need for it.
Yeah. That's the problem.
We all need to guess. So the BZA can't simply approve something because the applicant's your friend or he's just a good guy in town. I sometimes wish petitions before the BZAs came in anonymously. And, all you were looking at is the info in front of you, and that would make everything very interesting, but it doesn't work that way. Oh, put back to the previous one, yeah. The BZA cannot grant a variance to a standard of the subdivision control ordinance, same as the Plan Commission can't grant any waivers to the zoning standards. So each group oversees their own ordinance and what they can and cannot have flexibility on. Just like the Plan Commission, the BZA cannot require unreasonable conditions or commitments be tied to their petition decisions.
Okay, could you give an example of when something might be borderline, but when it's pushing beyond an actual reasonable?
If your community suddenly decides that everything needs to be brick, you can't make some accessory structure that needs a variance be totally brick, even if the house up front is, let's say, vinyl sided or wood or a historic structure. Or you can't make aesthetically say things have to look a certain way when that really has nothing to do with the petition in front of you. I don't know if that's a really good example, or you can't say, well, we'll grant you this variance, but we want you to tear down all those trees in your front yard because they dropped so many leaves. The two have nothing to do with each other.
Well, some of the ones I remember from grad school at the law classes were the ones such as, well, we got to prove it, but you're going to have to provide us access to your property.
Right.
Yeah, because a lot of them, the ones that were particularly, some of the notorious cases get into regulatory
Yeah,
takings.
yeah.
How do you handle historical homes that have been put on the record? That's, you're limited as to what you can,
Yeah, if you have a historic district that's established and everything, you're probably gonna look for a recommendation from the group that oversees that.
because there's tax breaks for people that have these
Yes,
homes, and
yeah.
they could lose it if they put wrong things in.
Right,
Well, that's one of the things we've talked about in the past, is that the city has historic districts. They have a historic district commission. And I've suggested in the past, if you want me to actually be able to say, I can't give that to you until I get something from your commission.
sign off from the
And
commission,
because
right.
I need your sign off, but I also need, in my zoning code that I administer, that, so that I can say, you gotta get this first. Because the city council cannot require that I, as a county agency, implement their rules.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So I need theirs in the zoning code for me to require that certificate from the Historic District
Right.
Commission.
Right. So, and then lastly, the BZA cannot hear any appeals from a plan commission decision or a town council decision. So, if a plan commission or town council does something that you don't like, you can't come to the BZA and say, fix this, make it better, unfortunately. So here's what your legislative bodies cannot do, meaning your county commissioners or your city or town councils. They can't do anything that BZA does. They cannot do anything that the plan commission does, such as approve subdivisions. They cannot deny development plans or approve them. They cannot issue building permits. They cannot tell the BZA what to do, and the legislative body cannot tell the plan commission what to do, except to initiate a zone map change or initiate an ordinance or a comprehensive plan update. So each of those bodies has their own rules that are spelled out in statutes, and there's not supposed to be any cross-pollinating, if you will, into each other's business. So here's maybe some little known abilities that each of the groups can do. The Plan Commission can attach conditions to any of their zone map recommendations to the town council, even if it's not favorable. So you could forward an unfavorable recommendation on a zoning change, but say, in the event the town council decides to approve this, or the county commissioners approve this, we want to make sure A, B, C, and D are taken care of. So maybe it's making sure there's road frontage or proper access to the property. And that recommendation goes forward to the legislative body, who has to recognize that as part of the decision. And paralleling that, the town council or the city council or your commissioners cannot remove or diminish any of the plan commission's recommendations that came from them. They can send them back to the plan commission for reconsideration and then nix them if they want to, but it just doesn't happen unilaterally once it changes hands. The town council and the plan commission can initiate a zone map change with or without permission of the property owner. I wouldn't recommend it, but if there's a problem area, maybe it's a land use that no longer meets the zoning district, it makes sense to change that zoning district. They could act without having permission of the property owner. And lastly, the town council can direct the plan commission to update the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinances if they feel they're out of date. So hopefully they budget for that as well, but they can require that. So lastly, I want to talk about some fun reasons that you may need to update your ordinances, or little things that are triggers to say, hey, we need to look at our ordinances. So Number one, if your current ordinances are older than your oldest plan commission member, it's probably time to update those ordinances. If your zoning and subdivision ordinances are two separate documents, you may want to look at changes. State statute allows you to merge them into one document called a unified development ordinance. The only difference is you're sharing one set of definitions, so there's no conflict, and you can cross-reference within the same document without having to pull the two separately. If your legislative body is approving a subdivision, it's time to update your ordinances. That changed quite a while ago to the Plan Commission is the only one that's supposed to do that. Number 4, if the text of your last amendment still has the name of the town that you borrowed it from. Clearly, there's not some proofreading going on when you adopted that amendment, so that's something you want to look for. If your ordinances do not address renewable energy uses in some way, or they're not even mentioned, it's probably time for an update. There's been some changes at the state level that say you have to do it this way, and this is the things you need to consider when you're doing it, and that should be reflected in your ordinances. Number 6, if the staff copy of the ordinances has doubled in weight because of all the Post-it notes, that means we've got some procedural issues or possibly some interpretation issues that they're trying to be consistent with. It's time to look at that language and clarify it so they don't have that much of a headache anymore. If your industrial district is the secret hiding place for your NIMBYs and LULUs, has anybody heard of the term NIMBY or LULU before?
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard is the NIMBYs, and the LULUs are the locally undesirable land uses. So if you're putting the stinky things or the undesirable things, sexually oriented businesses are one of those, tattoo parlors, if you're throwing them all in the industrial districts, you know, it's time to look at those and really get them out front and address them properly. Maybe they need standards attached to them, maybe they need some help for administration from another group, whether it's the police department, health department, things like that. You know, let's get them out there and address them. Number 8, if you get a Christmas card from the asphalt industry because your extensive parking requirements. So if you have way more parking than needed for some of your businesses and you're sealing in all the nutrients of the soil with all that asphalt, it may be a time to re-examine that. There's a couple communities in Indiana that no longer have parking requirements. They just let the business decide how much parking they need. And if you're a stupid businessman, you'll put in no parking and your business will go out of business. So it puts the burden on them to prove how much parking they need.
Well, I think in conjunction with that, is that would, you know, that be to that point, it'd be really important to have a very strong plan review,
Yes.
development review
Yeah.
committee.
Or you have an impervious surface coverage standard in your ordinance, or, you know, the parking needs to be beside and behind the building and not just all up front. So different ways to deal with that. Number 9, if your BZA hears variances every month and always approves them, clearly you're approving something that is acceptable to everybody. Let's just make it in the ordinance that way, and then you don't have to visit them every month.
I mean, we need a token reject?
Yes, there you go.
Well, what we've had in the, was,
You're on, Billy.
well, some of the few that were actually rejected were the, well, I want a variance because that's where I want my garage. There's no hardship to it.
Yeah.
And Mr. Crawford has called a couple of them out, and they've ended up being rejected for that reason,
Yeah.
because there's no physical hardship.
But for example, if you're giving everybody a 10% increase in their signage allowance, just add that to your ordinance and make it so. And then lastly, if your PUD district is your only mixed-use district, it may be time for an update. A lot of communities are creating some mixed-use districts, especially in their downtown areas, where, hey, let's require businesses on the ground floor constructed to a certain height so they can always accommodate a business, and then allow residential up above, you know, minimum size units or something like that. Have some, or maybe it's another unique development near your highway that allows some apartments in the back with some low-intensity commercial in the front and make that a zoning district or an overlay district that would allow that to happen.
Can you think of any examples of anybody who, because we, Connersville, where, okay, that's in sort of a depressed condition as Connersville is, that successfully has use in the downtown area, some type of mixed use, creating a mixed use district. Might be
Sure, well, I hate to bring up Carmel all the time because they're a unique situation, but they've created a huge demand to be in the downtown areas because they provide trails that make that a destination point. They've minimized the amount of parking that occurs on the street. They've moved it behind the building so it becomes more walkable. They've changed their signage
some
requirements.
small communities though.
Small communities, they're still working on it, I would say.
Because I know it's, because when you're not wealthy, it's a little more, I think
I
it's a little more
understand,
difficult
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, and maybe it's just meeting with the property owners in that area. Hey, what would you like to do, or what are we preventing you from doing that would bring in more
So
business?
this would
or
be more
bring
along
in
the lines of, well, if you're going to redevelop.
Right. So I think that's the last one. So some other resources you can look up. The Indiana chapter of the American Planning Association has put together a citizen planner's guide, and we're continuously adding new chapters as issues come up, which reminds me I'm supposed to write a chapter on unified development ordinances and overlay districts. I haven't gotten to it yet, but they cover Plan Commission and BZA basics, rules and procedures, ethics, comp plans, ordinances, development. I mean, just about everything that you do, they have a chapter or something that addresses it. And it's actually pretty interesting, and we do updates on those chapters fairly frequently. I'd say every 2 to 3 years, in case something has changed or the statutes have changed and needs to be reflected on that. If you have problems sleeping, I wrote the chapter on subdivision ordinances and subdivisions, so you can download that and read through it and help you get drowsy of the night. So are there any other questions or specifics that have come up before you folks that you want some outside opinion or input on?
I guess one thing that I have, and it's come up several times, this being a small community, there's very few of us on the board that there's not one or two of us that don't know the person that comes before us,
Understood, yes.
or
Conflict of interest.
being involved in that type of occupation as ag, if ag, I'm involved with ag, employed through ag, and I've been accused of acting on ag procedures as a conflict of interest, just because I'm employed in agriculture. Could you talk on conflict of interest a little bit? I mean, we have contractors that are part of the BZA that their friends come before the BZA
Right.
of other contractors and so on and so forth. I don't think that necessarily constitutes a conflict, but maybe.
Sure, and as you're probably aware, you're on the Plan Commission because of your expertise in that field.
That's,
And when folks come in, they're not coming in blind, you know their story. The statute does spell out what constitutes a conflict of interest, and also your rules and procedures should spell that out. And I'm sure your attorney jumps in when necessary, but it's usually if you are going to benefit financially directly from that decision, that's when you need to pull yourself out.
That's happened in Cincinnati, hasn't it?
Well, it's happened everywhere.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
something has come up.
Yeah.
but it's a direct financial gain
Right.
is where, okay.
Yeah.
There's other things in ours, really relative, various degrees of.
Now, Gary, if someone's coming in here and they've bought 100 acres off you and they're gonna start a subdivision, you may not want to vote on it because you're involved in the sale of it, but other than that, you're.
Well,
and
but with
If
the
you're
sub-
unable to be unbiased either, if you're
Right.
unable to make a determination.
If you're gonna make money, if it gets
one way or
approved,
the other.
that would be the conflict.
Yeah.
So if you feel uncomfortable, you're not sure, is this a conflict? at the meeting, bring it up and disclose that, and you can let the group and your attorney weigh in and give you guidance and assist you in that way. What you don't want to do is just say, I can't vote on this and walk out the room. Nobody knows what's going on, and it's important to, again, discuss and disclose it. We all want to be transparent to our constituents, our community, and keep them comfortable in your decisions as well.
And as this is probably the most turnover we had in 1 year, well, I should say 1 and 2 years with a lot of new members, could you give people a little bit of better understanding than I probably can as with the ex parte contract?
Your Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial body, meaning they act as a judge. So the same as you wouldn't go up to, your county judge and tell him how to decide a case that's before him, you as BZA members shouldn't be discussing the case that's before you. You run into that friend in the grocery store that says, hey, I want to talk about this special exception for, something controversial. You have to say, you need to get with Bill and staff. We want to make sure that everybody's input is heard and made available to the public. And, Bill can filter that information to the group as a whole simultaneously. So obviously you run into somebody at church or somewhere and they start talking, you cut them off, but then at the meeting, bring it up to the group and say, hey, my neighbor approached me about this. I want to let you know that this was their concern, but I told them I can't talk about it, and maybe they're here tonight to tell you their concerns, or they've submitted something in writing ahead of time, and then that should be fine. And again, your attorney can direct you on, hey, you shouldn't have done that, or something like that, so.
I've not had it here, but in other places I've had to let BZA members know that, hey, we don't like, some of them get so excited when they start that they start reaching out to applicants to talk to them about their
Oh,
project.
no.
And I'm like, whoa, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah,
And they don't, it's not that they're trying to be anything unruly, they just think they're being involved in the process.
right. You can contact staff and say, I have a concern about this. What can we do to make this more palatable? And that's the proper way to do it. But, yeah, you can't reach out to the applicant or vice versa as well.
Yeah, because in general, we've had both plan commission members also, even though it's not required under the code, we do have it under the rules of procedure.
Yes.
Which I think is a good practice.
Yeah.
So we've had both plan commission members and haven't been busy enough with things really for it to be a challenge with new members. But in the past, it's gotten to where that's one thing with both APC and BZA members, they've all been pretty good about is understanding the ex parte contract.
It's not that what you're doing is top secret, it's that we want it to make as public as possible. So that's why it needs to be filtered through Bill, so he can make sure it's available to everybody if it's a concern.
One question I have, kind of on those same lines, and there's been a few times, over the last several years where I've gotten the packet for a special exception, and a lot of our application packets are sort of loose in what we require them to provide, and certain people are better than others about providing it. And so as a BZA member, is it appropriate to go to Bill when like if there's a piece of information I know I want, would it be appropriate to go to Bill and say, hey, can you go ahead and get this from them or have them bring it to the meeting? Because I know it's a question I'm going to have.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate?
Totally appropriate, and then make it available to everybody. Hey, this is
Right.
But not go to
information
that
about-
petitioner,
Yeah.
but go to Bill.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Another question I had, can you talk for a minute about, and I work with a lot of confined feeding operations, I'm a consultant, so my exposure to most APC and BZAs and other communities are related to sometimes controversial issues. And so I would like for you to take just a minute about the voting sheets and how important they are and what pieces specifically are important on a voting sheet. Does that make, you understand what I'm asking here?
A little bit. Not all communities use voting sheets.
Okay.
So if you could maybe elaborate on what you do with the voting sheets or why you have them. And
Okay, well, the idea was I think the ones we now have are an improvement. But we started using those after trying to get the board members over time, the plan commission and zoning board members, like, we need your input.
Reasons, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we need your reasons. Here's the criteria. Does it meet this criteria or does it not? But there's some of the ones with the ones I adapted from Tippecanoe County, I think it's an improvement because of some of the information it has at the top.
Are these mostly with BZA petitions or all plan commission
well,
and BZA?
Well, right now mostly BZA petitions, but I had to modify them for the public hearing that we're going to have on Monday. So what I modified with that, and also included a little bit of a discussion myself in the staff report, was that, okay, here's the things we need to look at. Okay, reasonable consideration for a code amendment and also the zoning map amendment. So here's the 4 things. Number 1, comprehensive plan. Then the other items, which right now just kind of escape me, even though I wrote them the last couple of days.
I wouldn't have any problem with using them, provided you're also talking about them and they don't become some type of secret ballot thing where people don't know what was written on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, because we did typically mention, it's like, okay, everybody, please, fill out your voting sheet and then give it to me before you leave.
Okay.
This has kind of become new to me, to be honest with you, the voting sheets. And I'm more a fan of, that's part of our motion to approve, is we put the reasons in there and approve it. The vote, I've not seen it done, so I'm not sure how we're going to have that to where it's part of the record. Because it can't be what you just said, I'm gonna tell us Monday, we're not doing it that way. We're not just handing them to you and then we're done. We're gonna have to either read them.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So that's where I'm.
Well, that gets to earlier, I was also asking the part about needing to have, well, definitely with the importance of having a discussion on each particular item.
Well, sure, but, and then that's where I think, to me, and I'm just not familiar with them. I'm not saying they're better or worse.
Yeah.
I'm just not familiar with them. To me, I like that to be in the motion.
Yeah.
And then it's clear.
Well,
But if it's, what if we vote against it and we have different varying answers on the 4 questions? It makes it, to me, it's gonna make it very convoluted. I would prefer personally, if I'm advising you guys, I would advise us to have it in our motion. That we are going to pass it for this reasons, or we're going to deny it for these reasons.
Or I
That's,
think it's something that should be in your staff report. These are the things to consider.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons initially they were adopted, because there's difficulty getting board members to actually make a clear motion other than thumbs up, thumbs down.
well, then you look at me and I'll say, hey, I don't like that motion. All right, we need to be more precise with our motion.
Yeah, and then also the importance, I think, of because I'm a fan of having a robust discussion after the public hearing is closed.
Explain robust.
Yeah.
I don't want Minneapolis again.
Or BZA member, a motion formula that says when you make a motion, so for example, in the BZA decision, I mean, because I'm me, if you say, Carrie, I want a motion, or Jeff, if you make a motion, the motion starts with the name of the petition. This is how we want you to make it, who it is, what it's for, and the findings of fact, whether they do or don't meet them. And is that, maybe that bit is in the motion.
As a guide or a template.
Same sort of thing. So if you provide a formula that just sits up there, or is at the end of the agenda, for a while until we all get back into the habit of it, the reason that I don't ever include it in a motion is because, and this is a BZA thing, not maybe EPC thing, I feel like we're kind of talking about 2 different things. BZA, special exception, and this is why I was mostly asking it. BZA under findings of fact, especially if they find that it doesn't meet, and then nobody wrote anything down, there wasn't much discussion, and then the decision was overturned because they didn't write down why it didn't meet that finding of fact.
Well-
And so if you're using a voting sheet with BZA, it's always been my understanding to very clearly write why you said no.
But do you do one voting sheet for everybody, and then or do you just do one voting sheet for the vote? I mean,
Currently, it's everybody gets a sheet.
yeah, and that's
I think
pretty.
that's
But
probably.
why not, why don't we vote on each finding of the facts?
Ooh, you could do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we don't, let's say, because the law says if it passes all the findings, we have to approve it.
No, not on a BZA petition.
But on,
They're talking about an ordinance.
Oh, okay.
on the on an ordinance. I mean,
Well, no, not necessarily.
So if we did it like you're saying, then we would have, what are there now, 5 findings of fact?
Well, there's one that was added.
But even if it had all
6.
6 of those, that doesn't mean you have to pass the ordinance. Even if you say it's responsible for development and growth, conservation of property, most desirable use, even if you say it's all of those, but we like our current ordinance better, or we don't want to change it, then you could vote it down.
Right.
As far as the ordinance goes.
Yeah,
I don't want to confuse that.
Yeah,
What I
because
think,
you have discretion.
I think the voting sheet to me personally is valuable to have each of you have it so you know the discussion points, kind of like we were talking about an agenda. But I don't know,
my concerns are, Jeff,
yeah.
the more documentation, the more chances you have of getting yourself in trouble.
Yeah,
I'm
and one
all
of,
for removing the voting
I-
sheets, period.
I've kind of been around you guys a lot.
I know, and one of my other concerns is what's going to happen is we will have 9 people vote on this, right? And we will
9
have
different
9
answers.
people say it passes. And then we'll have answers on here and they'll say, well, no, I didn't do this,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
okay.
That.
And then all of a sudden we've got one of, 45 answers is a problem. So to me
And if that
personally,
become public
what we
record,
should-
It
what
is
we,
public record.
right, and it has to be public record. I mean, that's the key to
These
all
are the
this,
kinds
is
of
everything's
things
public
that
record.
I, as a consultant, if this were in another community, I would like be salivating, waiting to get the chance.
yeah.
Not that I've done that.
I
Well,
like
well,
the idea of.
honestly, I would prefer to have the robust conversation and then a discussion of each point by point by
Yes.
point.
Well, we can do that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's-
that-
Without having a voting sheet.
I move to remove voting sheets.
I think it should be a discussion sheet, nobody writing anything down on it.
Right, right.
And then we could have it could be a voting sheet that everybody has the same exact language as their answer and then signs it if they agree with that. If we're wanting that,
I don't
answer,
think
but
you need it.
I don't think you need that.
I don't, but we have it right now.
Okay, well, if we have a good discussion that goes through and everything is clear from the discussion that goes on with either the BZA, with the special exception, or with the plan commission, with the, whether it's a map amendment or a code amendment, that's fantastic. I'd much rather have that. But as I'm saying, the reason with adopting that is because I couldn't get that.
So
Well,
let me ask
I
you
mean,
this.
people didn't want, okay, goes back to one is at one point in time, when because at first, I didn't make recommendations. They didn't want me to, plan commission, zoning board, they didn't want me to make recommendations when I started. And it didn't change until one time, where asked for, have a conversation. Well, one member who was on the plan commission at the time said, why should we? You're supposed to tell us what to think. And so at that point is that, well, in that case is, do you wish me to make recommendations? Well, so the very first one, special exception that came up after that with making a recommendation, well, I made a recommendation to approve, but the person who wanted me to tell them how to vote decided they didn't want to approve it primarily because several people who came in to talk against it were his friends.
And they can I mean, if you make a recommendation, they don't have to.
Oh, no,
agree with
I
it.
know they don't have to agree with it, but that's just what happens. So it's an irony situation with me. I'd much rather have it, but it was almost, it's kind of tactically forced into trying to do something like this to get something out of board members. Because otherwise, some of the ones I've read about that get kicked back for lack of findings. Well, we said no. It goes back. And around that time, and there were several of them, one in particular, that's, you got some of the counties in the area. And that's all it was, it's like, no, so they had to send it back the court sent it back, findings. Well, they did a lousy job the second time around, so, there's still inadequate findings, so it got sent back to the zoning board again.
But that could happen even if you did give a fabulous recommendation.
Yeah, and it all went back to the thing with the actual findings, and a lot of it went back to absolute zero discussion on the parts of the actual board.
That's something we can work on.
There's nothing to discuss. Like, I guess, there's so many that we see that are pretty perfunctory. Like, I mean, there's We have several things in our zoning ordinance that are special exceptions that are not controversial, that are still special exceptions. And so quite often, you know, my preference is for them to come in and say, I wanna put a hairdresser, you know, I wanna put a one-chair salon in. I would prefer them to say, I meet findings of fact one because of blah, 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 finding. They're not gonna do that because they don't come to the planning commission every day. And I don't really feel like the board at that point has to discuss all of those because it's another hairdresser thing. My point is yes, we need to work on our ordinance, but in the meantime, is it overturnable, I guess, or, you know, is it an appealable decision? Everything's appealable, but is it likely to fail on such a routine special exception?
You never know.
But is every special exception that routine? Because even a hairdresser, you've got parking to consider and location. And maybe, have you ever turned one down?
Probably not a hairdresser, but yes, we've turned special exceptions.
Because there's other things to look at than just the little
Yeah.
business you're gonna have in your.
I guess what I'm saying is that but when those things come out, very, very, very rarely, and we've got a great board right now, but very rarely over the years have I ever heard a board member say, I'm concerned about this operation because I don't think it meets finding of fact 3, health and orderly. It doesn't meet this one because it's not orderly development. Now, they're saying it doesn't have enough parking, or if they build this monster of a building in the middle, it's not gonna, you know, what they're worried about meets or is interfering with one of those. But most of our board members, even when they know that finding of fact, they're not in the discussion saying, I am concerned about this because finding fact number 3 says blah, 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 and I'm worried that construction of X is going to interfere with that. They just say, I don't like construction of X, and that's why I'm not voting for it.
But you want to put the reason down.
Well, I
It have to be-
think that's what Bill is
Yeah,
asking for.
Yeah, rather than
And I
just,
don't think
I
that-
don't want to do it.
I don't know that that's,
A couple things you can do if you're not already doing it is in your application packets, make that applicant fill out each of the findings.
There's
Let
some
them
cities that do that.
explain to you.
And we do that, don't we, Bill? Currently.
Awesome.
there's varying degrees of success.
Yes.
Yeah,
I just said,
but those findings are laid out.
Well, I often have to walk people through it.
Yeah.
I usually have to walk people through it. And
And that's
because you get a blank
that's what you're here
document
for.
and you're like, fill this out, and you're like, I don't know how to fill this out. The average person doesn't know
And
how
I-
to.
And I have no problem with walking people through it.
Right.
Because I know that this is the planning language, it's from the Indiana code. You know, it's criteria that's gotta be met, you gotta demonstrate then whether that meets it.
Why are you special? That's what
Yeah,
I often
yeah,
ask.
so it's one of those ones where is that, okay, there shouldn't be a problem, but here's what this is the basic sort of thing I need you to say. I don't fill it out for them.
Right. Another thing you could do, and as Bill just pointed out, the statutory findings they tell you to consider are, I think, intentionally vague to cover you either way. If you feel strongly, you're allowed to add more findings in your ordinance that clarify for you whether it's a comfortable decision. So you can say things like, the variance is the minimum necessary to achieve the project. There's adequate access, or there's adequate drainage, or, you know, anything that keeps coming up that makes you kind of, well, I can't tell if it meets this one or not. You can add to that list. You just have to start with that basic 3 or 5 and go from there. So you're allowed to do that.
Well, would it be then appropriate then within, so, for when the applicant comes in? So, here's the legal criteria. I'm kind of stuck with the language from the state of Indiana. But this is, you know, but then a way to paraphrase something such as X, Y, and Z, such as this right here, this is what it's referring to.
Yep. That's what, I mean, on the application packets I do, I spell out this statutory criteria and end it with because.
Yeah.
And then ask other questions, you know, how is it compatible with this area? Does it look the same? Does it act the same? Is it the same size? And just pose other questions, almost like a worksheet for them to use.
Okay.
Right.
Oh.
So, and another thing you can do in your rules and procedures is at our public hearings, once the public hearing's closed, we need to discuss this item. Put it on your PowerPoint. We need to discuss this finding. We need to discuss this finding, and everybody gets their.
I would rather see us do that than ask us to personally put things in writing.
Because that helps the applicant understand what you're doing. It helps a member of the public that's sitting in understand why you're approving or denying, and it helps you all decide, make your decision.
No, I like that idea. Because it's because there's a lot of problems within it to remove from the rules of procedure. But in the meantime, there's also things like this, that we could add to the rules of
Right.
procedure that would help them.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that says during that discussion, you can't ask Bill, can you clarify, or, what's your opinion on this part? And help you make that decision. He loves that. He loves
No,
to-
that's when I do the munch look.
On a little different subject, if we're faced with an applicant for a zoning change for a particular parcel of land, we have, in the past, we've been a county that's tried not to spot zone, so to speak. But we've realized the depression, our depressed economy, that sometimes we need to if we've got a potential new business coming in. If those applicants come to us, we realize that would be a spot zone if we change that, but we understand the importance of that business. Could we put a construction timeline on that zone change? So like if the deal falls through,
Absolutely.
okay.
We can actually put a sunset provision in. Okay, I was always under,
Justify it,
what's that?
justify it.
Yeah, okay, because I was always under the impression that with that, with that zoning map amendment, that we couldn't actually sunset it.
You can't just make it automatically happen for every zone map change, but if you say, hey, this needs to happen in such and such a time, this is what the applicant has promised us, and here's why we feel this condition is necessary.
Don't you do that with some of your building permits anyway?
We do with the building.
Yeah, well, those are actually allowed to expire after X period of time, under Indiana Administrative Code, yeah. But
It's a condition specific to that project.
Right.
I mean, what concerns me is we've got property out there that we spot zoned 12, 15 years ago that never was built for that zone.
yeah, basically, yeah.
And now, what used to be residential is zoned medical or whatever it was.
To me, spot zoning is kind of a relative term. A lot of times you may have property being used differently than it's zoned. And when a use comes into, or property comes in to be rezoned that really fits the fabric of the area, it may look like a spot zone on the map, but in actuality, it's in total context with what's already
Yeah,
there.
it fits the character what's
So-
there. Okay, but,
And maybe the conditions placed on a rezoning make it more palatable, even though on the map it looks a little, what the heck's going on here?
Okay.
So,
yeah, well, getting into what Gary was saying, that because, I mean, one of the things I did early on, I started going through, I was familiarizing myself with, because there's no order to try to say, okay, all the zoning code amendments, there wasn't a master list of them. There wasn't a master list of all the, the rezones. And so I went through, and there's just a huge number of these basically speculation rezones that were never acted on.
yeah.
And so I guess part of that is then once again, gets to well, should you ask, should you not get the consent of the property owner to rezone? But there was an actual speculation rezone that never actually occurred. The appropriateness, and then say maybe any of the tricky aspects of getting rid of these speculation rezones. because as Gary mentioned with the one, there's out on the Gray Road, right by Indiana 1, it was Doctors for Medical Service Center. So rezoned to MS. Well, the doctor didn't build there, but he ended up building instead on the other side of town on 44, but he's never required then to, as part of that rezoning, to remove the zoning from the other one.
Which I don't think would have been a logical thing to require
Yeah.
as a condition.
Yeah.
So,
So what's a
Why not?
reasonable way to really
because
do
they're
it?
not related really.
Okay,
I mean, it's tied to the property, not the person.
Right.
yeah, okay.
And now we have a single family
You
home
can
and a
encourage
medical
him in your
services
discussions when he
district.
makes application, hey, we're not gonna use that, why don't you, staff will support you in a petition to rezone it back, or act as the
But
applicant.
you didn't give him that,
Well,
you didn't give him that for him.
yeah.
You assumed that property, that was an appropriate use of
Yeah.
that property.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm on the money side, so I'm asking, when you rezone something for medical or whatever, does that go to the tax records also, so they're paying taxes for that instead of for
Not till it's
residential?
developed
Not till
as
it's
such,
developed.
Until it's developed.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's the,
I think we need to make some changes. That would help a lot, wouldn't it?
what about special exceptions? Can we put a timeline on a special exception?
As long
Every
as-
one of them?
As long as you justify
Yeah,
it, yeah.
that's frequently done other places.
Because we have another special exception that's out there that 20 years from now, they can come in and continue, go right on and build.
Essentially, every
And,
decision,
and the community may not be right for it
That's
now.
something
Gary, I
should
don't think you
think
go ex
about.
post facto, you can't go back and put it on now, but you
No,
need to,
yeah, no.
When you issue a special exception, that's something you have to take in mind. Like, why would it be okay now, but it wouldn't be okay in 10 years? You have to make yourself ask a question. And one thing I try to push to other boards, and I've not had to say much here, is it's just like when you make a subdivision. You're making a building lot.
Yes.
Okay, people don't think about that. Like, well, I'm just gonna use it for a pasture land, but it makes sense to deviate. Well, no, the next time they sell it, they may put something there. So I mean, you're not giving it to that person as much as you're giving it to that land.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know that you should stress a lot when you give a special exception for something. If they don't do it in 5 years, would it really have changed? I mean, if somebody asked to do it in 6 years, would it have made it different? You know what I mean?
They would still have to stick substantially with the plan. So like, let's say
Right.
that I came in and said, I'm gonna do this, the next person bought it and they were gonna do that, they can't do something completely different. Like, they'd have to stay substantially with the plan.
only if that was a condition of the.
special
approval.
exception.
But on the other hand,
If
the special exception
was for
stays
a
with that
solar
property.
farm, they couldn't put a wind farm
Oh.
on it. You understand what I'm
Right,
saying?
right.
That's the.
I'm trying to think, almost all of it stays with, just about every single thing you guys do stays with.
I mean,
There might be an exception.
Th-
somewhere.
I guess
Just-
that's my
it's
concern
everything's
is-
for the land.
Home
not the
occupation's
person.
about-
that may drive the market as well for resale. If that land has a special exception on it that's 20 years old, and I want to sell that property now, it may cost me thousands of dollars in value because it still has that special exception stuck with it.
Can't you have that removed, the special exception removed?
I would think it would.
Not if the property owner didn't make that special exception, right?
If whoever owns the property could ask for it to be removed.
So otherwise, if that property owner is under lease, has a lease contract, binding contract on that property that goes with that special exception, and I'm speaking of the wind farms,
Okay.
Farm-
all of those owners are under contract still, to my knowledge, for those windmills.
If they sell it, the special exception goes with the land, right?
Yep.
But most of the time.
And that lease does.
Yeah, but almost all the time, I mean, very rarely would a special exception decrease that
Yeah,
specific
I was
property
gonna
value.
Right.
It makes,
But usually
the land you're talking about, that doesn't harm that value.
Well, it would to a certain buyer potentially.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like,
Like
I-
they
But
have a
conversely, a
different use.
special exception could
Maybe
also
wanna use it
increase
differently than
value
they could be
of
forced.
specific land.
Could,
Yes.
yeah.
But
To
sometimes
the
depending
right
on what their
buyer.
contracts are. Their
But-
contracts may be with that specific individual rather than with the land too.
And
So even
I
though
mean,
there's a special exception, would have been a special exception to allow it on that parcel, there may be a separate, that their agreement may be with just that specific property owner.
when and we're gonna we could face this with solar as well. I mean, when the wind company come here for the special exception, did they get the special exception, or did each individual property owner get a special
When they made
exception?
application, they should have had permission from each property owner involved.
Which is all the people under
consenting.
contract, yeah.
Yeah,
So here's.
So who can petition for the special exception to be dropped? The property owner or the company that
the property owner.
has a contract with that property owner?
Property owner.
Here's
But they
the-
may not be able to do that
No.
outside, through the contract, they
Yeah.
may not be able to
Right.
do that.
See, that's what I'm,
Right.
They-
But then somebody wanting to buy their land has to understand that there's this minute possibility that could happen. I mean, it all goes to, I mean,
if
I get
you-
what you're saying, but there's.
Well, we've
It's
never
not the
seen a
BZA's
wind
job
farm
to
yet
worry
that was
about
closed
whether a
down.
landowner
Now, once it's
loses
closed down, then you've got,
opportunity
what we're using it
Exactly
for.
right.
It's just, I mean, it's a buyer beware. It is not the BZA or the ABC's job to worry about whether or not Joe Farmer decreased his land value by getting into some renewable energy lease that wasn't favorable in 5 years. That's kind
Okay.
of not our concern, like.
Right.
so does a building permit, does the building permit go with the property or the owner?
The property and the owner who had
Because
requested it.
if I get a building permit to put a whatever on this piece of property, and I sell it within that year of that building permit, does that building permit, can the new owner go ahead and use that building permit, or does he have to apply for a new one?
Now,
As long as they build what the permit allowed,
Yeah.
they don't need to get it.
Okay, that's what yeah.
Well, a good example of one that's happened was with, okay, your dad. Well, it's his land, so he had to be party to the special exception for the tower.
Mhm.
So they're actually, the tower, the real estate's still owned by your dad. But the tower and that physical property is owned by the, whichever aerial company it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Another thing,
And then they're paying him a lease.
Welcome back in real estate school.
another thing to think about the actions of the BZA is every time the BZA grants a variance, they've created a non-conforming use each and every time. So cumulatively, that's a lot to keep track of for staff. It's a lot to, I mean, you're changing that use the way it normally would occur forever unless you put terms on it for expiration.
Perfect example of that is you give somebody a variance to build closer to the road, right? You know, in 2 years, the neighbor's gonna wanna add a front porch, and then all of a sudden you're looking at, it. You don't have to do it, but it snowballs into an
Right,
impact.
the whole neighborhood.
You
wants
wanted
those
all
front
of them
porches.
50 feet from the right of way, but all of a sudden in 40 years, you have them all 20 feet from the right of way, because everybody wants to.
Or
have a
10.
porch.
Yeah.
I mean, so, but what she's talking about, that's the exact, I mean, I think about that all the time. The non-conforming use, you have to get that in your head. I mean, they're here because we've said, this is not what we really generally want.
Mhm.
And there's a reason that this person, is what's your question that you always ask, or you ask them a lot, is why are you special?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's where that question comes into play.
I mean, at first I say it sarcastically,
Sure.
it's snotty to them, but then I go, no, explain to me why you're different from your neighbor.
Right.
Like I had a friend of mine, they had a historic home, and they wanted a pole barn to store their cars in. Well, as you know, the historic homes didn't have a garage attached if they were built in the 1800s. So I was like, why are you special? And she's like, well, you're rude. And I said, no, what makes you different? She goes, our house doesn't have a garage. And I'm like, there you go.
Right.
That's your hardship, is everybody else in your area has a garage. You should have a garage as well.
Does it never get down to highest and best use?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I ever want to encourage you to go to best use, because that's all in the eye of the beholder. I mean,
Exactly.
a positive.
That's why I tried to
use, a
tell the
good
judge, but he
use.
didn't agree with me. Don't go to Indianapolis.
There's a fine line between the bee holder and the beer holder. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Because that's frequently what I've had to do with people also is, Yeah. With garages. Well, it's in line with where they are with everybody else. Everybody else is close to there because they're older. It's an older neighborhood. They're fourth. So then there's a rationale for it.
Yep.
So that's a commitment.
But Debbie, thank you so much for being here and going through this with us. I'm sure we'll ask you to come back on another topic at another date when you're available.
Very good.
But make your sign much clearer, because that side with the APC, I cannot read it all.
I apologize. When I'm on my little computer screen,
Yeah,
it was just fine.
That's the
and
lighting.
we don't always
Yeah, it's the
know.
lighting over.
Well, we could have turned the lights off and then everybody left and
That's why I try to read it as well a little bit, so I'm not missing anything.
So with the comprehensive plan, I guess we do have a small update, May 5th. Is that the right date? Cinco de Mayo, we have a meeting for, to review proposals to tackle the comprehensive plan. So I think that's an 11 o'clock meeting. It's either 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock, one of the two, on May the 5th, to start getting into the, I guess, the meat and potatoes of the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And then as far as zoning code, Bill,
I
do you have
don't
any?
really have anything extra to add about that. And, because that's really what's, really the last month, everything's been ready for, I think everybody's been looking forward what's happening on Monday.
And then rules and procedure. I think we had a nice discussion tonight on some things to talk about with rules and procedure and voting sheets and no voting sheets. I think it's something that we should put on the agenda for May. Possible to just have that discussion to see what direction that we want to go.
Well, I do request one thing, because we're cutting short the period of time with the meeting. So let's keep it simple with what we want to try to have ready for that meeting, because it's, because we're having it a week early, and I'm leaving on the 22nd is when I'm flying out west.
All right.
Now, instead of 4 weeks, we have 3 weeks.
there might be someone to send you out west if you don't go.
Well, give me enough money, I'll stay out there. I like the weather.
Moving on to the director's report. Does anybody have any questions regarding the director's report? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do I have a second? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Related to that, though, is the, we do have the, you see, we did get the 17th. So for the Tarpon Heights, the company that bought the properties from,
Wade Journey Homes that purchased those
yeah,
properties.
exactly, they bought Tarpon Heights, is they have 17 permits, actually the two that are up off of the, okay,
That have
and 2
foundations.
lots have already actually been sold, but those are houses they haven't started building, those are gonna be the next two, so they have 2 that they're working on now. So I spoke with the project manager, and he said, once they get going, he moved pretty quick on completing those. I asked, I said, 17 open permits, that's an awful lot. And so, but they're confident they'll be able to build them and sell them,
I sure hope they do, quickly.
even in
Yeah,
both.
before the interest rates go up.
One thing to talk about are rules for the public meeting on Monday, adopting special rules for the public meeting. It's pretty consistent with other public meetings that we have done in the past, where presenters are asked to sign in before the meeting. That way we know who wants to speak. Allow formal presentations, a 20-minute maximum, a 5-minute maximum for all others to voice their opinions until the hearing is closed.
What do we classify, what would we classify as a formal presentation?
Okay, well, for
And
one
what
thing
is
right now is the,
Individual speakers.
okay, well, people that are gonna sign up that we typically have, well, right now I have one request for someone who's gonna want about 20 minutes. because it's a very formal presentation, they won't be, they want to use something electronic. Now, the other one on there is that, so that'll be the one such as we've had at the meetings where people are signing up at the door. It's like, okay, and so it's that basically be what they mean with that, because right now is the only people I know that have requested specifically to speak. Okay, it'll be Gary Smith, and then also the attorneys for Mr. Bills. And from past with Mr. Bill's attorneys, it's about 20 minutes, and I assume they'd probably be a 20-25 minute range.
Okay, if they,
I have a quick,
Yeah.
because I was around the last time that the zoning code changed, and that public, because I feel like it's a very separate public meeting procedure than special exception, controversial special exception public meeting procedures.
Yeah.
So to give you a frame of reference for a pretty controversial BZA special exception hearing, typically our county has always said 5 minutes per person, and kind of unlimited how many people want to talk. A lot of the counties that I go to, it is 30 minutes pro, 30 minutes con.
Yeah.
And that may only mean 6 people get to talk, so pick your 6 best.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that has to apply, huh?
I'm not gonna be in favor of that.
No, I'm not, I'm just saying, I'm not,
Because you might have
No.
40 people against it, but that doesn't mean they're all together.
Yeah.
I understand, but my
Right.
point is, I don't think that I think it's very odd if you adopt a rule that says 20 minutes for formal presentations. Like, if you say
I
that
agree.
now, I think that's a very odd provision.
I agree. What I'm gonna encourage it is, it's 5 minutes per speaker, period. Now, if
I think
5 people
requirement-
if they want to pool their time together, then we can give one speaker, that person 25 minutes with a maximum of 25 minutes per speaker. Okay?
And if
That's
there's not, if there's not
If there's not 5 people that they have pooled together, then
They
that's a
get
discussion that
20
you can always grant more time. but
No, no,
that's the
they get
maximum of
5.
this, but-
Yeah, it's the, well.
Is what he's saying.
Because
but
what's,
if-
Because what's
if
a
they
formal,
pool,
I don't like the idea of what a formal
Yeah,
presentation
that's my whole.
is.
Well, that
I
was
don't
my
like that at
point.
all. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not a fan of that.
because you're gonna look at somebody and say, yeah, yours is formal, yours isn't.
Right.
but, well,
you
as me
can
with
say
that
no
is,
more than 2.
So you get, everybody gets 5, here would be my recommendation, I'm certainly not, everybody gets 5 minutes. If you can pool together enough to get to 25 minutes, then you can have a maximum of 25 minutes for a presentation.
If the board allows it or not.
No, I think that they should get that no matter what.
Okay, and if
And
there's
the board
not,
can always allow extra,
gonna
okay? And
say
you can
that
always
was my-
call people up to, if somebody brings up some great points, maybe 5 minutes, and but their time's up, you can always give them more time. You can always allot more time to somebody.
Can the chairman do that by himself, or does the board need to vote on to
No,
allow
he can
him?
allow that by himself. And I would encourage you guys to use, as uncomfortable as it gets, I would encourage you to allow people to speak. I mean, it's a public hearing. That's the whole point, is to
Yeah,
allow
absolutely.
everybody their opportunity to speak.
yeah, well, that was one of the things is also because we don't really have a pro and con the way we do at the controversial special exceptions.
yeah, well, I don't, maybe I'm fooling myself, I don't think there'll be the volume of people that you worry. I could be
No,
wrong.
well,
A couple questions I would have.
because I didn't know about that, yeah, because I haven't had anybody contact me for information.
Would it be out of line to suggest to them though that if somebody else has already said these comments, please don't repeat over and over?
It's already in there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
I mean, it might be recommended, but you
It
can't.
doesn't matter how many
Yeah.
times.
Just judging from what we've seen in the
Yeah, I
past.
think that the best thing
And Bill,
is-
honestly, if somebody wants to say the same thing that somebody else said, I mean, more power to them.
unfortunately, that's just part of it.
Yeah,
Is you guys, there's a possibility we might be in for a very long night, and we might not hear very many original thoughts, or we might hear a bunch of original thoughts. But that's kind of the public duty.
Well, this is where it also gets into, because adopted within those rules are the actual cutoff times. So,
But that would be my recommendation. That, I don't really necessarily agree with the, yeah, and I
Yeah.
get what your thought, I understand what your thought was, but that's,
My
or would it
concern
be
is the
one to
same as
require
yours.
then, say, at the start of the actual hearing, before they speak, is if they require more than the 5 minutes, can they then say, request approximately, say, 15 or 20 minutes as far as because to get through my presentation.
And have the people that are there say, this is, I'm passing essentially my time to
Yeah.
for her.
I would agree with that.
What's the our APC discussion? We ask questions of speakers.
Okay, that is after the public hearing is closed. This gets into the discussion we had earlier about the importance of having a good, strong discussion. This is where you discuss among yourselves, or if you need to pull out also more information from somebody who's spoken.
Is the audience still there?
The audience will still be
If they
there.
elect to be there.
So if there is
they can
somebody
leave
who
after
is
session.
there that you made a note of, that you want a little bit more information,
And we can call on a speaker to.
you
give
can
us
ask that
information.
person, yes, to come to the podium.
Two things you need to know. So people get these confused. Public hearing and public meeting. These are always public meetings, okay? We're having a public meeting right now, okay? Which means the public is
meeting held
absolutely
in public.
allowed to see it, they hear it. They don't necessarily have the right to speak at it, but they have the absolute right to be, that it's public business, they have the right of it. Public hearing, they actually get the right to be heard, okay? So right now, at this meeting is, right now where we're at in this meeting, if you said there will be no more comments from the public, they don't have the right to come to the podium and speak.
There's a woman out there, I'm
When we-
gonna say that.
When we open the public hearing up Monday, when we open that portion, they absolutely have the right to come and speak, okay?
Yes.
And we're saying that they get to speak for 5 minutes as an individual.
Right.
So that's the two important things to understand. But when it's, and one thing I will stress that may or may not happen is, you get to speak, you don't get to inquire, you
Right,
don't get
it's-
to ridicule the board, you don't get to say, Mr. Naylor, why are you doing this? You don't get to do that. And I'm
Thank
strong
you.
enough personality, I'll take care of
So
that.
Questions of board are out of order, that's correct.
Yeah, so
It's-
a public hearing is for the public to voice
Their
their
opinion.
opinion. During the public hearing, we should not ask questions. That should be for during the discussion typically, and call
Yeah.
them back and let,
That I'm not gonna, I don't know, what do you guys, I don't care about that quite as much. I mean, if a board member has a question, but then maybe you're eating into the 5 minutes, I don't
Yeah.
know, I mean, if, I don't have a problem with us waiting, letting everybody speak and then calling up questions, I don't dislike that at all.
I think we might speed things up a little bit if we just be quiet until at the close of the public hearing, and then we speak.
I like
and
it.
then
I saw
what,
someplace about repetitive questions or something, yeah.
and then once the public hearing closes, at that point, it's back to the regular meeting where
Held in public.
unless we ask for somebody to come speak, it's out of turn for them to speak.
And then we'll have, and it's kind of in here pretty well, we'll have the options, we can either approve the ordinance and send it with a favorable recommendation to the commissioners and to the city council, or we can deny it essentially, or it probably more likely that it just doesn't get a vote for it positively and then it doesn't get sent anywhere. Or we could not vote on it that night and save it for the next meeting or a special meeting or any other kind of meetings.
Well, I noticed we're scheduled till 11,
Yeah.
so we can create a closing. I mean, we can shut people off and say, well, we're done with the public
It's
hearing.
closed at 10.
Continue it if the public hearing portion isn't
Yeah.
finished.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to close it with, if there's, my big thing is, and I think this is very important, is that if you want to speak, we are going to give you the opportunity to speak. Just because the people in front of you took more time or there were more people than we expected is not going to be a reason for somebody not to get to speak if they want to do so.
Absolutely.
So, I just think at that point in time, we would continue the hearing to another day.
You gonna keep the bell? That's it.
I have a suggestion, a pet peeve, a very passionate request. Do not allow the person speaking to heckle the crowd or vice versa.
Oh, absolutely.
It's already in there, they're not allowed to talk like that to each other.
Because so one of the things that has happened at nearly every single public hearing that I have been at with this board is a certain person will stand behind whoever is speaking and yell. So they have a speaker here and there's an individual in our community who stands here and interrupts and pushes literally sometimes. Do not allow.
We need a sergeant at arms.
Jeff already said he would.
That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, that will not
Who
happen.
we're talking about, I've not been a part of any of those meetings yet, fortunately, but that won't happen.
I don't know who it is, but it won't happen, rest assured.
Am I wrong?
It's gonna be a very
Oh, you're not
professional,
wrong.
Brian,
a
do you
very
wanna,
professional, respectful hearing.
do you wanna vote
To
on it
everybody,
Yeah,
both
to
sides, every
adopt
side,
as amended.
neutral, everything.
as
It's gonna be
amended to the
respectful,
5 minutes
it's gonna be kind, and that's-
total?
But if we don't have any further discussion on these proposed, I would entertain a motion to accept these rules as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we approve these rules of procedures for the public meeting on April 26th and as amended with the 5 minutes per speaker. How would you like to put that, Jeff? They can
Pool,
They can pool
their
up to
time,
25
Up
minutes?
to a maximum of 25 minutes.
Up to a maximum of 25 minutes.
Awesome. We have a motion, do we have a second? Have a second from Brian Ra. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Adjournment.
I'll recommend that.
I have a motion from Leota and a second from Bob. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
now declare the BZA for 4/22/2021 to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, roll call, please.
Okay. Carrie.
Here.
Bill.
Here.
Jeff Fisher.
Here.
Darren.
Here.
it.
Leota.
Present.
Bill McDaniel.
Present.
Jeff Wesley, and myself. All right here.
Okay, we have no minutes from the meetings, so we don't need to approve that. And then next on the agenda is director's report.
I move we approve the report as written.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion made and properly seconded to approve the director's report. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion carries. Okay, next on the agenda is adjournment.
Move to adjourn. I'll
All
second.
right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.